Light, airy, shattery on top, custardy, creamy in the center. As French a pastry as you can get. This is Choux au Craquelin. Choux au Craquelin. It's a cream puff with a crispy, crackly top that shatters and gives way to this amazing custard crème légère. The secret to it is just good technique. I'm gonna walk you through this from A to Z, starting with a perfect choux dough. We're gonna pipe it, we're gonna top it with our Craquelin discs, we're gonna bake it, and then we're gonna fill it with a pastry cream lightened with some whipped cream or a crème légère, and then we're gonna eat them. Let's make some choux dough. It is used to make all sorts of confections, éclairs, choux puffs, craquelins, croquembouche. It's a very, very classic item in French pastry. There are a ton of ways to make it, but the basic principle is it is a high moisture batter that consists of eggs, flour, butter, milk, and a little bit of water sometimes. That high moisture content is really the key to the expansion. As it goes into a hot oven, there's a lot of spring. As the water converts to steam, everything puffs right up, and then you get these really impressive cavernous sort of shapes. When you cut into them, there's a lot of space, and then you can fill them. So that's the basic premise of choux dough. As far as this recipe goes, it is fairly simple. We are gonna go in with some milk, some water, so it's equal parts by weight of milk and water. Got a little bit of butter, salt, a little bit of sugar. As far as liquids go in choux dough, you could use all water, you could use all milk. If you used all milk, I find that the browning tends to be a little bit better, but it's not quite as crispy, it's a little bit more tender. If you use all water, your expansion is maximized. And I find that it gets pretty crisp, but it lacks a little bit of tender custardiness. So I'm just bringing this to a gentle simmer. So here I'm using bread flour. Bread flour, as opposed to all-purpose flour, has a higher gluten-forming potential. That's helpful for breads because it has a sort of higher tensile strength. So it can withstand the expansion without blowing out, and it doesn't deflate as much. But in the case of choux, this is kind of in between a bread and a batter and a cake and all these things. So I'm really just using it for its higher water absorption, and it does have better tensile strength. I was finding that the shape was holding better as I piped out, but also that it could withstand the expansion more and it was collapsing less than, say, all-purpose flour. So for that reason, we're using bread flour. Bring this to a nice boil, and then we're gonna dump in our flour. At this point, I'm gonna turn things down slightly just so I can really incorporate the flour. Being careful to knock any bits around the side so I can mash things down and get things incorporated. There might be pockets of like dry flour, so I'm really, really trying to work in there. I'm using a flexible-ish spatula, but oftentimes if you're having trouble, you could use a wooden spoon, like a really stiff one. In fact, a lot of old school pastry chefs will swear by a wooden spoon to get things incorporated. But for me, it's just more important to get things really mashed down and knocked around. So I'm gonna crank this back up and we'll get to cooking it. So as I said, this is a pretty weird dough batter situation. It's a cooked dough, so we're really gelatinizing the wheat starch here. And that gelatinization is really key because it creates a gel, and a gel can really expand in the oven. We're not really developing gluten or anything like that in the typical sense. If we were just to sort of hydrate the flour and not heat it up, we wouldn't be gelatinizing anything, really, but we would be potentially developing some gluten. But here, because it's cooked, it's more than anything, it's more like a panade. Now, a lot of pastry chefs will tell you to cook this until the skin forms at the bottom. That's actually a useful indicator, but it's not so precise. And for me, the best indicator honestly, is temperature. Wheat starch gelatinizes around 124 Fahrenheit and all the way up to like 165. And so I'll get to a point, maybe a few minutes in, and then we'll take the temp. Now I am reading 175, perfect. So at this point, we're gonna pull it, and then we're gonna incorporate our eggs. Get our choux dough, transfer it right to our food processor. It's a good sign it kind of goes as one clump. Most people will incorporate their eggs either with a wooden spoon, which is super old school, or they'll transfer out to a stand mixer, and they'll paddle it, and then slowly incorporate the eggs. The problem with those methods is that they're kind of slow, and there's actually spaces for error. It can take a really long time for the eggs to fully emulsify. Using a food processor is really beneficial for this. It just makes it really light work, super easy, kind of foolproof, honestly. We're just gonna cool this down slightly. So I'm going to process it for about 30 seconds. And that initial processing is really to knock some of that heat off because I don't really want to scramble the eggs when I incorporate them. All right, so I'm looking for roughly 140, 145 at the top end. And right now it's temping out at around 132. Yeah, steadily cooling down. The point is, I don't want to scramble my eggs, so we're in the clear there. For this size recipe, for about a cup of flour, it's usually 4 eggs. But eggs can vary in weight, so for me, it's really important to weigh your eggs. It just gives a more consistent result. I'm looking for 225 grams. All right, gonna turn this on and then just incorporate the eggs. Now, you'll notice that happened really fast. That's kind of the beauty of using a food processor. I'm just trying to scrape down the sides. There is some egg that typically pools at the center here, so I'm just trying to get some of that. I'm gonna give it one more buzz. That looks good to me. Now we just transfer it to a piping bag like this. I mean, alternatively, you could just store it in like a quart container or any kind of container covered and refrigerate it until you need to use it. But at some point, you're gonna need to transfer it to a piping bag, so why not now? We will be piping choux puffs for Craquelin. So a round tip like this, about a ½ inch. So we're just gonna load that in, give that a snip, gonna twist, and then push. Always like to fold down the sides, gives you a nice clean edge. Then we'll take a container. This is like a beaker, but you could use a quart deli. Anything cylindrical will do really well for this application. We'll just square it off like that. As far as loading it, pretty simple. Just take our choux batter and we'll just load it in. Using the beaker like this is super nice because we can kind of scrape by the edge. Just take your time, make sure you're scraping down the blade really well. All right, so that's well clean. All right, that's pretty good. We've got our choux dough loaded into the piping bag. At this point, I'm gonna take it out, give it a knock down. I will take a bowl scraper and just clean it up like this. Fold like this, give a twist. This is good and ready to pipe. This needs to rest a little bit, about 30 minutes up to an hour on the counter, just until it's a little less warm and so it won't pool out too much when we go to pipe it. Alternatively, you could let it rest in the refrigerator for about 30 minutes and then pipe the Craquelin topping. This is the thing that gives choux au Craquelin that iconic look, that very crackly, craggy sort of visual surface. As far as this goes, it's very, very simple. We'll start with softened butter, light brown sugar, and we're just gonna start there for now. I like to do this by hand, but you could also do this in a stand mixer with the paddle. Just work the sugar and butter together until it's homogeneous. So you could use white granulated sugar for this, but light brown sugar gives a little bit more of a crispy, sort of craggy texture that I was looking for. This is good to go. At this point, we will add some all-purpose flour. Lastly, a little bit of salt. You can't really overwork this dough. Even though there's flour in it, you're not really developing any gluten here. It really feels like Play-Doh, kind of. Just gonna plop our dough in the center here. The dough is super soft at this point, and then we just press. Just trying to give the rolling pin a head start, going from the center out, and we're looking to roll this to about a 9 by 13 rectangle. Unlike rolling, say, actual dough that has developed gluten or snap back to it, or say a pie dough, you can actually get away with squaring off the sides to get a perfect rectangle. And that's just a function of this being a very high fat, high sugar dough. It's roughly 9, 13 across. Feel with your hand the thickness all around. It should be roughly 1/8 of an inch in thickness. And I'm just feeling for any undulations here. It's pretty good. At this point, we are ready to cut our shapes. We're gonna come in with 2 1/4 inch ring cutter. At this point, I'm gonna stick this into the freezer, park it on a sheet tray. I'll place the parchment right back on top, and then we'll freeze this for at least 30 minutes until it's nice and firm. And then we'll use these top the choux that we pipe out and then bake it all together. For this particular recipe, we're going to be piping onto parchment. As a general rule of thumb for crackling, your topping needs to be bigger than whatever you pipe out in diameter by about a 1/2 inch. So this is 1.75 inches and our topping was 2 1/4. I'm gonna aim for about 12 per sheet tray, and I'm just gonna trace out a circle just like that. All right, so those are our 12 circles. Now, I could pipe onto here, but then I'd risk getting some adhesion or the dough touching the pencil marks, and I wouldn't want that. So easy solve, just flip it over, and we can still see the outline. This is our setup, just like this. And we start piping. We've got our choux dough. It's nice and tempered, it's been mixed, and I'm going right up to the rim, but not quite touching it because these will spread out. Stop, swirl. You wanna hold it 1/2 inch off the sheet tray, and you wanna go direct over. You'll fill and create a sphere, and then release, and then swirl. At this point, we're gonna top them with our Craquelin toppings, and then bake them. Grab our Craquelin toppings from the freezer. These are nice and firm. Pretty simple here. I take a small offset and just run it right through. They should pop out no problem. And so they'll go right on top. Try to keep them reasonably centered. And again, they're slightly bigger in diameter than whatever you pipe out. As a general rule of thumb, it'll be a 1/2 inch bigger in diameter. Our last disc, there you go. And then we have our Craquelins that are topped. I'm just gonna come at eye level to the sheet tray and just lightly flatten each one. I'm just gently tapping. I'm also making sure these are more or less centered. Pretty good. Those are your Craquelins topped and ready to bake. So these are gonna go into a 400-degree oven for about 12 to 15 minutes until they start to dome and puff up. They'll start to get a little bit crackly, at which point we'll turn the oven temperature down to 325 degrees, cook them for another 12 to 15 minutes until they're pretty well set. And then we'll turn off the oven until these are fully dried out and fully cooked in the center. So here are our baked Craquelins. Overall, really good. Really happy with this bake. I think it's realistic to sort of anticipate some imperfections. You might have some blowouts here and there, but for the most part, this one is like super nice. I'm really happy with these results. So we need to let these cool down, and then we will get to filling them with our crème légère. So let's make our filling. Crème légère is just a fancy term for pastry cream, crème pâte, crème pâtissier, that you fold in sweetened whipped cream into. So this goes straight into our bowl. As far as refreshing, all you have to do is whisk. It's gonna be very clumpy. You could do this by hand as I'm doing here, or you could stick this in a stand mixer and use the paddle. Just trying to get most of the lumps out. And now, this is looking pretty good for me. At this point, this is ready to get folded with some whipped cream. We're gonna come in with 250 grams of heavy cream and some sugar, and then we'll bring this over. Start it slow at first, and then you can increase the speed. All All right, now we'll slow down. I'm gonna stop it just before it gets to true stiff peak. When it comes to folding, a good rule of thumb is to sacrifice about 1/3 of whatever you're folding, and then that's straight in. Just gonna work it into the mixture. And this is intended really to bring the two things closer in texture so that when I go to really fold things, it's a more seamless process. This is pretty good. Now I can come in with the rest of my whipped cream. So for folding, I go in the middle and then fold. In the middle and then fold. In the middle and then fold over. And then every so often, maybe every 3 folds or so, I'll go around the outside. I'm pretty happy with that. At this point, we'll load it into a piping bag and we will be ready to fill our choux. So, got my piping bag in a receptacle. Got a small round piping tip. Now I should note, I'm really probably gonna use half of this because I need to be filling with one hand. And if I have a huge bag of crème légère in one hand, it's just gonna be really hard to pipe everything out. So it's better to work with a smaller amount at a time, and then you'll be in a good spot. Just bring this up. We'll use a little bench scraper, bring this all here, give a fold, another fold, come up, and then twist. Because we didn't overfill the bag, it's very manageable. So that's the guy, we're ready to fill. Finally, we can get to filling these choux. I'm gonna take a thermometer probe. You could also use a wooden skewer or a metal skewer. And I'm gonna go through the bottom and just hollow out slightly. So just enough for this pastry tip to go in. And then I'll work my way through one at a time. If I've done my job, these are nice and hollow in the center. Everything's really well puffed out. So there's gonna be a cavernous space for all that crème légère to fill. All right, so those are good to go. And now we fill. We've got our crème légère, and we'll go one by one. Gonna stick it in, keep it face down for now, and then just squeeze. And I'm looking to apply good pressure. At a certain point, it'll come through the opening, but it still feels a little bit light to me, in which case I will just knock it down slightly and then fill just a little bit more. And at that point, you've got your money's worth. So I'll set that down here and keep going. Every so often, I'm gonna want to choke up and twist up on this piping bag, and that's so that I can get a good handle on the amount there. As far as the amount of cream that goes into each cream puff, into each craquelin, I'm shooting for between 40 and 50 grams of filling. That's just what it comes out to if you really wanna get a scale out, but it should feel nice and heavy in your hand once you've filled everything. And there you go. All filled, all ready to eat. So let's check our work. So I'm gonna take one of these filled choux, gonna cut in. And look at that, perfectly filled in the center. No air gaps. We took the time and the effort to really fill it through. I'm really happy with that result. In terms of the structure of it, I see that it's filled the entire space. So we got a really nice bake on it. It's all hollowed out. I can see all the layers, the shattery topping, and then the custard, and then the choux on the bottom. So it's totally encased. It's the perfect shape for me. So let's just give this a taste. Again, shattery on top, really crispy, lacy, but not like crunchy or anything like that. It's just very yielding at the same time. And that contrast between the really light crème légère is so, so amazing. I can see why this is a mainstay in a lot of French pastry shops. Yeah, just a really, really good result. This is a sign of a really well-filled choux craquelin. We really went edge to edge. You're getting your money's worth here. I'd recommend maybe a plate for this and not just a table, but If you want to make this recipe at home, go to ChefSteps.com. We have the full Craquelin recipe up there. We also have the perfect choux dough recipe, so if you want to make éclairs, gougères, maybe a croquembouche, we have that there for you as well. Check it out.
Subscribe to our channel and visit ChefSteps.com for more tips, recipes, guides, and tools to help you level up in the kitchen.